3 questions. What if the bloop, as the urban myth describes it, was real? What will it take to feed this thing? And third, what if we created our own biologically plausible bloop? The answer to these questions will be beyond frightening. So if you have the guts to face this alternative reality, by all means, keep watching. And subscribe! Lots of really good content will be released, so you don't want to miss any of this. We'll break down the bloop as we know it in a little bit. But first, for those of you who have absolutely no idea what the bloop is, give us like 40 seconds to help you catch up. In 1997, one of the most frightening discoveries of the century was made. A strange sound coming from the depths of the sea that rose in frequency and was heard across multiple sensors around the world, 3,000 miles apart. If we rule out that this sound was the sound emitted from a large bomb or submarine, this would have been a terrifyingly massive entity. And in the words of NOAA scientist Christopher Fox, this sound was far more powerful than the calls made by any animal on Earth. Meaning that, yes, this animal must have been many times louder. And as a result, many, many times larger than the largest animal living today, the blue whale. Alright, now let's talk about how big this guy kind of is, and speculate what would happen to our oceans if this thing actually lived right now. For starters, let's take an estimated guess on the exact size for our what-if scenario. And the truth is, there is no exact size. This bloop is a result of pop culture's wild imagination, an animal portrayed as being as large as a regular whale to beyond Titan proportions. Perhaps the most famous rendition of this animal was the infamous bloop from Boris Albois' creation Bloop vs. El Gran Maha. So, guess we'll stick with this one. We took a 3D model of a similar animal and got to work. Bloop around these proportions would have been 350 meters in length. That's already 3 times longer than the Monsterverse Kong and taller than the tallest cinematic version of Godzilla. And with some shifting, this animal can already fit most of the kaiju in any continuity into its mouth pretty easily. Each tooth would have been between 2 to 6 meters long, depending on the exact one used. Another gnarly-looking bloop would end up having a single tooth around 10 to 12 meters. Imagine each tooth being the size of a T-Rex. The tail fluke alone would be around 183 meters wide from tip to tip, 80 meters tall if the mouth was opened really wide. How heavy is this thing? Alright, get ready for this one. With an average volume of 539,073 meters cubed, and assuming body density comparable to most marine mammals, this results in a mind-boggling mass of 849,744 tons. Even with a big hollow cavity for the mouth taken into account. We can already sense the most critical amongst you watching thinking, there's absolutely no way that thing can eat enough to stay alive. Well, let's find out. To answer that, we need to figure out what even is this thing. Is it a mammal, reptile, or a large fish? Assuming that we are working with real biological families of animals to start from, the physical description and apparent ability to vocalize this loud would mean that the bloop would probably be a mammal, or at least closely related to them. Long, streamlined body, a visible jaw formation, horizontal fluke, and 2 fins on the side. All hallmarks of a fairly modern whale, member of the Cetacea. So, unless we are looking at some extreme case of convergent evolution, our very first guess is that this is some kind of whale. To find out what this thing will eat, let's first find out what's available on the menu, by finding out where it would live. The original sound came from the Southern Ocean, and coincidentally, this would actually be the best part of the planet where bloop would live. Now, those of you who think that it's a little weird for this colossus to live in a desolate environment, consider that the Antarctic Ocean provides this massive, supposed warm-blooded animal with a natural coolant of sorts. Given this animal's sheer size, the fact that it generates its own heat from cellular activity, it's already going to be running hot. Because of this, bloop may continuously fight a biological effect known as gigantothermy. And the fact that this thing burns a lot of calories, we now need to learn how this thing would feed itself. When it comes to feeding this thing, it's safe to say that the world's entire ecosystem will likely suffer. There's a reason why Monsterverse kaiju such as Godzilla are labeled as animals that feed on radiation, since there is relatively an infinite source of that than there are things to eat. Getting this bloop satisfied for the day will be nearly impossible, but let's pretend, for once, that it was. For a warm-blooded animal like a whale, each kilogram of body tissue needs around 25 to 40 calories a day. And some tissues, such as the brain, need more calories. This would be even higher for bloop since it has to swim constantly against the water and because it thrives in cold temperatures. To make this simple and quick, a whale shaped like a bloop would need about 30,834,975,600 calories every single day.
And we're back. The team is looking down the barrel of a 4:55 meeting.
Can they turn?
And in all likelihood, this is kind of lowballing it. Bloop is infamously known online as a creature that loves to pull up on humans and waste calories on what would be an equivalent of eating an ant. Smaller, actually. If it was eating humans, which contain an average of 125,822 calories, this means Bloop would have to eat around 245,000 people every day. That's around 70 mega cruise ships worth of people daily. That filter feeding stunt whales pull on krill and plankton? Bloop here would have to be doing that on people per scale if it could even reach them. But surely we'd imagine that there are never 245,000 people floating in the Southern Ocean all at once. So it would resort to eating the largest animals on the planet and gobble these record-sized whales constantly. It would be chugging down a whopping 40 large whales every single day, even with supplements such as swallowing entire schools of fish, pods of whales, entire colonies of penguins. Feeding this dude for a week would nearly single-handedly crash entire ecosystems and the global food chain if it roamed the seas and continuously chased down food to eat without starving to death. What happens if you get eaten by one? We have a special episode coming out discussing this in detail. So subscribe not to miss it, and to help fund our videos, make sure you check out our new Bloop t-shirt. Alright, so as much as we'd love for an animal this big to really exist, unfortunately, it's evident that an animal as large as Bloop isn't really sustainable on this planet. But here on Koji, we aren't going to leave our viewers with our arms crossed. We'll pretend evolution took an alternative turn and came up with a biologically plausible Bloop. And what if, for whatever reason, Mother Nature saw fit to allow an animal to evolve into a gargantuan creature with the characteristics of this notorious urban legend? Would it actually be this big? Would it be a feared predator? Or will it still be outright impossible? Let's find out. The objective of this section is to hypothesize the largest animal possible as long as it is within plausible biological parameters. This means trying to get it to be bigger than the largest animal on Earth right now, the blue whale. This is an animal whose ancestors were actually not that big by today's standards. Baleen whales that lived during the Pliocene and Miocene were kinda small. In less than 5 million years, Mother Nature brought forth gargantuan creatures that exceeded 100 feet. So the ability for a titanic animal to evolve from a much smaller ancestor over a relatively short period of time is actually possible. Does this mean that our bioaccurate Bloop is a whale? Not quite. To keep this realistic and to make the Bloop as large as biology will let us, we have to select what kind of animal we are talking about. If the Bloop were to evolve from the reptile class, then that really wouldn't have worked. These creatures were air breathers, and the animal that would have eventually evolved to Bloop would have been hunted down or pushed out into a less hospitable environment. There is no evidence that suggests that they lived long after the Cretaceous. If they did, then we'd have a lot more shallow water-dwelling marine reptile fossils. But we don't. Would it come out of the marine mammal class? Or maybe from the larger sharks with warm-blooded characteristics? No. As mentioned already, an animal this big would still run into the issue of eating enough food to keep it running. Remember, we want our Bloop to be larger than these whales. There is one class that might end up working out, actually. Bloop today would have its ancestors dating back to the Paleozoic, a time before the dinosaurs, and whose closest living relatives would look like this. No, seriously, this isn't a joke. Now, granted, there are no amphibians today that lived their whole lives in salt water, but there have been some in the past that have adapted to it. One group being the Trematosaurs, which survived a major extinction and thrived in the Triassic period. And slightly possible that they may have survived into the Jurassic. If they had adapted to live in deeper water as opportunistic predators and scavengers, they would have been just fine despite low food availability, which is a trait that the present-day amphibian-class bloop will need. Similar to how giant isopods and squid survive in the deep ocean with little or no food, bloop's ancestors would have waited out food scarcity and then increased in size as the ecosystem improved. As whales entered the oceans, these ancient predators might have targeted them instead, evolving better swimming abilities while using ambush tactics. This adaptation would lead to a gigantic amphibian that rests on the seafloor and waits for its prey, benefiting from changing ocean conditions that brought food closer to the surface. The Goji Center team and researchers have come up with a biologically plausible version of bloop and what it would have looked like if it evolved from this class. The bloop, or Cryocidon citavinator, is a massive amphibian potentially measuring 35 meters in length, weighing in at 300 to 420 tons. It features a jaw span of 6 to 7 meters tall, with teeth ranging from 6 inches to 5 feet in length. This animal is really heavy. Almost too heavy. But with a few tweaks, this animal will be just fine. This creature's bones could have a lattice-like structure providing strength without excess weight. Being cold-blooded similar to reptiles, this bloop requires a lot less calories than a warm-blooded animal would, allowing it to thrive on a low-energy diet. It would still need around 2.3 million calories per day. Sounds like a lot, but this is actually less than some whales. Some amphibians will enter into torpor. This is a state where an animal such as a reptile or amphibian lowers their metabolism greatly. For amphibians and reptiles, this state is technically called brumation, the equivalent of hibernation for mammals. This way, bloop will be able to rest and spend long periods of time without having to eat. Its amphibian nature enables it to extract oxygen from the water itself, allowing said periods of dormancy. Waking up when conditions are more favorable and going out to hunt. How? Well, here's where things get interesting. Bloop could remain stealthy through slow movement and effective camouflage, taking advantage of its surroundings to catch prey off guard. This involves ambushing prey from the seafloor, targeting young whales, and utilizing a suction feeding method for smaller schools of fish or big giant or colossal squid that would be found in its hunting territory. To navigate through this said territory, or mating, this creature would have also developed unique vocalizations thanks to its adapted lungs, crucial for finding mates and communicating to another bloop over a very large distance, similar to how whales communicate. Historically, there have been reports of mysterious creatures in the Antarctic, creatures like the Ningen. If this animal was alive today, with the change in the world's oceans and rapid decline in the population of Antarctic whales, these apex predators would have to face changing circumstances, either going extinct or seeking other areas in search of food. And be it those areas are the places where humans thrive or seek their own sustenance, there would potentially be a pretty bad combination.